And I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, first and foremost, we wish to congratulate the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Caroline Ziada, on her first briefing about the situation in the province, and we wish to thank her for her considerations. We welcome the participation of the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Serbia, Nikola Selakovic. We have listened to the views of Madam Donika Givarda-Schwarz. To begin, we wish to underscore the following. The position of the Russian Federation on Kosovo remains unchanged. Security Council Resolution 1244 remains the international legal basis for resolution of this matter. We advocate achievement by Belgrade and Pristina of a viable, mutually acceptable solution on the basis of this Security Council resolution, which should be in line with international law and should secure the approval of the United Nations Security Council. Before moving to an assessment of the current situation in the province, we wish to remind colleagues of the following. This March marked the 23rd anniversary of the bombing of Belgrade by the NATO coalition. As a result of this 78-day operation, thousands of civilians perished. More than 1,500 residential areas were destroyed, as were 60 bridges and 30% of all schools and hospitals and approximately 100 monuments. The coalition used tens of thousands of bombs and cruise missiles, many of which were equipped with depleted uranium. Overall, 15 tons of this radioactive substance was introduced in the area, which resulted in the contamination of a vast territory. The dire consequences of this crime for the health of people and the environment continue to reverberate to this day. Also, the fact that NATO chose a certain ally on the ground is noteworthy. The Kosovo Liberation Army was chosen as the ally on the ground, and the KLA's manifold crimes remain unpunished to this date. On 7 January 2011, a report was issued from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe on the crimes perpetrated by the KLA from the year 1998 to 2000, including crimes against humanity, war crimes, systematic abductions and murders, as well as large-scale trafficking in human organs. It is now 2022, and we are still closely monitoring the work of the Special Court on the investigation of the crimes of the KLA. We continue to hope for an objective investigation and a fair verdict. For now, this has been in vain. For our part, we view as unacceptable the attempts undertaken by Pristina to dispute the legitimacy of the judicial process and to convince the international community about the alleged infallibility of KLA representatives. Let us also recall that on 24 March 1999, the permanent representative of the Russian Federation to the United Nations, Mr. Lavrov, cautioned about the adverse consequences of such an act by NATO, not just for prospects of resolving the Kosovo situation and for security in the Balkans, but also the adverse consequences for the resilience of the entire modern-day system of international relations. It is clear that this is when the West donned the garb of the world's policeman and opened Pandora's box. An important step towards ending the bloodletting and beginning work for reconciliation between Belgrade and Pristina should have been the adoption of Resolution 1244 by the Security Council. At the same time, the Western permanent members of the Security Council were the first to lose sight of the above-mentioned resolution as they hastily sought to recognize the unilateral proclamation of independence of Kosovo in 2011. There was no referendum, nor a resolution of the Security Council or the General Assembly in this regard, and ultimately, a Kosovar quasi-state, a Western pet project was created. Another 2 years then transpired. The negotiations was handed over to Brussels aegis. However, in 2013, the Brussels agreements were arrived at by the parties, And unfortunately, they did not yield tangible political results. The Kosovar Albanians, using myriad pretexts, have for 9 years been sabotaging the creation of the Association of Serb Municipalities, thereby derailing the process itself of the creation of inter-ethnic reconciliation in the province. For this association was designed to meet the core needs of the Kosovar Serbs in the area of security, safety, judicial and political affairs, and social, economic, and cultural affairs. We regret the fact that neither in the Secretary General's reports nor in the statements of most colleagues has this issue been addressed. Without the association, the Kosovar Serbs remain vulnerable. A stark example was the doubling in the number of attacks targeting them and targeting their property. These attacks doubled in 2021 as compared to 2020. There has also been a significant uptick in such attacks this year. From January to March alone, 35 incidents have already taken place. Let us recall that since 1999, there have been virtually no Serbs in the southern parts of Kosovo, and yet efforts to definitively drive them out of the province are fully underway, and there's a clear intent to erase their cultural and religious identity. There's a permanent threat looming over Orthodox churches and monasteries, including those which are enshrined in the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. One of them is the Visoki Dečani Monastery, which since 2016 has not been able to restore its lands despite the ruling of the so-called Constitutional Court of Kosovo in its favor. Beyond Serbs, other non-Albanians are also subject to discrimination. Effectively, there is an intent to drive out all national minorities from the province. The numbers of returning non-Albanians to Kosovo, these numbers are negligible. We would request that Council colleagues give thought to whether they want to be complicit in the creation of an ethnically cleansed Kosovo for Albanians alone. This is unacceptable to us. Also unacceptable is the way that the provincial so-called government violated the electoral rights of Kosovar Serbs. Contrary to previous practice, they were prohibited from voting first during the Serb referendum on 16 January and subsequently and during the general, presidential, and parliamentary elections on 3 April. Ultimately, tens of thousands of people were excluded from the democratic process. We emphatically condemn attempts to obscure the long-term negative consequences of what took place. We demand that moving forward, such legal violence be counteracted in deed, not in word, in line with their broad authority, be counteracted by the international presences, first and foremost the UN mission and the OSCE presence. The list of other dangerous unilateral actions of Kosovars is long in their destabilization of the situation in the Serb-populated north. In September and October 2021, the situation almost spiraled out of control when the Pristina Special Forces took a checkpoint along the administrative line and a number of other areas. Let us recall that the Kosovar police used firearms. Dozens of civilians suffered as a result. Such reckless conduct is ongoing to this date, including in isolated, hence all the more vulnerable Serb enclaves in the south. Each new pretext is more absurd than the last. Spanning the unsuccessful searches for contraband to attempts to seize COVID vaccines. We reject the actions of Pristina regarding UNMIK. There has been no accountability for Kosovo Albanians who were complicit in the beating and detention on 28 May 2019 of the UNMIK officer, Mr. Krasnoshokov. Another mission representative, Mr. Antonov, on 31 December 2021, was declared persona non grata by the provincial authorities. This constitutes an egregious violation of the established international legal norms. Clearly, it is incumbent upon the UN to ensure inviolability of their presence in Kosovo. The activities of the mission in the province is more important than ever before. There's a need for it to be able to fully carry out its mandate and to have the necessary resources to do so. Mr. President, We are very much alarmed by the ongoing attempts, ongoing since late February, by Mr. Kurti and his network to undermine the situation in the region by escalating anti-Serb rhetoric and by calling upon the West to take Kosovo under its protection to protect it from the alleged threats which loom over it. Pristina began to demand escalated and expedited integration into NATO and other Western associations to seek the deployment of a new permanent U.S. military base in the province. These kinds of ideas, like the intent to create a full-fledged army in Kosovo, are fundamentally at odds with Security Council Resolution 1244, and they are fraught with the risk of further fueling tensions. We have heard about deliveries from the British side to Pristina of anti-tank missile systems and guided missiles, as well as the deployment of instructors to train the security forces. As for the Kosovars themselves, they would be well advised to fundamentally reconsider their priorities, to focus resources not on procurement of weapons, including through a special fund that was established to collect funds for strengthening the defense of the province, but they should focus funds on addressing the difficult socioeconomic situation. These are the realities of the modern so-called state of Kosovo. Despite those methods that were adopted by the United States and a number of European countries when it was created in 1999, which I mentioned at the beginning of my statement, at the present moment, neither Brussels nor even Washington are in a position to exert significant influence over Pristina. Even the harsh criticism against Kosovo for their failure to comply with basic democratic and human rights standards, which Western standards have resorted to of late, even this has failed to yield results. Clearly, these kinds of observations are insufficient. In fact, no tangible steps are being undertaken. This all brings dialogue to a dead end, and it leads Brussels on the path to discreditation of mediation efforts. And this is especially unfortunate given that the protracted crisis in the province is escalating. There are clear threats from this area to all of Europe: economic, migration, and even terrorist threats. It is important to understand that this is a reckless approach. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I give